that kind of stuff.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, this week there was a statewide televised debate on the Louisiana U.S. Senate race. Two of the media panelists asking questions of the candidates are with us tonight. We'll get their perspective from the inside. We'll also update the contested congressional races and look ahead to the 2015 governor's race. In addition to politics, crime is usually a big story. Well, in this, the week of Night Out Against Crime, we saw a police chief's appointment made official, a newspaper series on deaths in parish prison, and a program to deal with the police and minor citizen complaints. On the beat for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Jeremy Alford, publisher, LaPolitics.com. Naomi Martin, reporter, NOLA.com, The Times Picayune. And Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate. And Jeremy and Stephanie, you both were there on the panel for the first debate with three candidates to appear. Jeremy, what's your take on it? How did it feel?
I've had a lot of people come up and ask me who I think won. I think everybody lost. It was a very few surprises. The format of the debate did not allow the candidates to ask each other questions. It did not allow the candidates to rebut each other. I think those are where you get the fireworks and the special moments, and I really like that. But overall, my take, I'll give you 3 points. Number one, I was surprised to hear Dr. Bill Cassidy come out in support of medical marijuana. It's the first time we've really heard him talk about that. It gives it a little bit of credence. He's a physician. He has a very respectable career. Number two, Rob Maness, I thought came off more polished than I thought he would. You got to remember, this is a guy who was barely polling a year ago, and he gave some very eloquent responses in front of a national audience in a spotlight he's never been in before. Number three, I thought it was interesting that both U.S. Senator Mary Landrieu stood by Barack Obama and Congressman Bill Cassidy stood by Bobby Jindal. Two of the most unpopular politicians in the state right now.
They both got 7s out of 10.
Right, 7s.
Right.
Yeah.
So what did you think, Stephanie? I mean, what was you guys were there on the inside.
Yes.
So give us the atmosphere. What was it like?
A little tense between Landrieu and Cassidy to begin with, just because it's the first time he's debated. She wanted more debates. There was a previous debate just between Mary Landrieu and Rob Maness, which was really unusual. So, and she's been just pounding him for not showing up, kind of basically calling him a coward. And he's really running this very kind of defensive, not defensive in a bad way, defensive. He wants to hold whatever he has. He doesn't want to lose any support. I think almost a front runner strategy. He being Cassidy. He didn't want to make any mistakes, and he didn't make any mistakes. And Landrieu is running. She's being very aggressive. She's kind of the underdog in this, just if you look at the party politics, even though she's the incumbent. She went after him. She found ways to go after him, even though there weren't direct back and forths quite a few times, and he did the same thing. One thing I thought was really interesting was Maness. I think one of the concerns of the Cassidy people was that he didn't have Landrieu one-on-one. He was going to possibly go into these debates and get hit from the left by Landrieu and from the right by Maness, who's a Tea Party candidate. Maness didn't do that. Maness really talked about how he was the outsider. The other two were professional politicians. He, took some shots at Landrieu and Barack Obama, but he mostly talked about himself.
Yeah, well, that's something that really struck me was how Cassidy and Landrieu were really lobbing them at one another. I mean, there was, as you said, no rebuttal, but they really almost didn't pay attention to Maness.
Who was right between them.
Right between them. But let's go back to the fact that there was no direct candidate questioning or rebuttal. Why not? Because that's always where you really do get some good information out of the candidates.
Well, you would probably have to talk to the organizers about exactly why those decisions were made, but if I were to look into the crystal ball, I would guess I would have to go back to what Stephanie was talking about, is that Congressman Bill Cassidy has run a very guarded campaign up to this point. He's running as an incumbent almost, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were some demands made by that campaign for his appearance, because he's only agreed to 2 of 5 planned debates this October, the next one being next week in Baton Rouge at LSU.
Right, and we weren't in on that decision, but if rule negotiations are always a big part of debate. I mean, look at what happened in Florida last night. A lot of people heard about. There was a big blow up over whether the former governor who's running for his old seat could have an electronic fan under him.
The fan has its own Twitter account.
Exactly, and the current governor didn't come out on stage for a while over this. So rules are important, even though the viewers generally don't see that.
I think some people that watch a debate are the more politically committed, the people are political thinkers, and so those kind of people would probably go into watching a debate with an opinion beforehand. Do you think there's anything that happened that could have changed people's minds, especially when to change your mind you're going from left to right?
I don't think so. I think there were some moments that operatives might use. For example, when Mary Landrieu gave Barack Obama a 7 out of 10, I immediately, looked at my Twitter feed after, and it was full of people saying, can you believe it? She did this.
Right.
People obviously know she supports Barack Obama. That's not a surprise. That's not going to change anybody's mind.
And I think there were folks watching this debate who aren't politically engaged, or at least not as much as maybe Stephanie and I are. I've heard from a lot of folks just at the grocery store and back in my hometown over the past 24 hours who did watch the debate, and I've been shocked by how many people did watch it. And I think those kind of folks who are watching the debate, you really need some big fireworks to make a difference, and these little nuances on Medicaid and Obamacare just aren't going to do it.
Right. But one thing that was interesting was I think people really haven't seen a lot of Bill Cassidy, so I did hear from people who weren't sure what he looked like and were just kind of commenting on almost his demeanor.
And so what impressed you? We heard from Jeremy about Cassidy's response about medical marijuana, and also Manus, the way he is comporting himself. What's your impression?
I have to say, one thing I find interesting about how Mary Landrieu is handling this is she's being very aggressive, but B, she's not really going for the middle. I mean, she's going for the middle on some issues, certainly energy, environment, but she's really kind of doubling down on some Democratic issues like healthcare, safety net issues, student loans, minimum wage, gender equity pay, things like that, which I think shows that she's really hoping to turn out her base, and she's looking at those people who might be in the middle and thinking, if they're worried about who's in charge of the Senate, they're not going to be with me. I'm not going to win those. So she's really focusing on her people.
Well, Senator Landrieu has always really had some contests in winning that seat, and certainly this year is no different. But how is it looking for the senator, would you say?
I think it's a tough election. I'm not going to say that she's going to lose, but I'll say that if she does win, I think it'll be touted as probably a surprise and a major accomplishment. This is different than past elections. And I think one reason is she has managed to win tough re-elections in the past because she's managed to get above 33% in the white vote. Right now, she's polling in the low 20s among white voters, and that's just not going to win a statewide office. And I think it all comes down to New Orleans again. It all comes down to that turnout that Stephanie was referring to with the key Democratic issues.
For voters. I mean, one thing that I think is interesting, I wrote a column about this a few weeks ago. There are Republican office holders in this state who have supported her in the past, who've crossed over and said, we need her there. She's gotten us loan forgiveness after Katrina. She's the first one to call me back when I call her a delegation. A number of them are sitting it out this time. People like Noel Norman, the sheriff of Jefferson Parish, who was with her 6 years ago, who is just sitting it out. So, and Pat Brister in St. Tammany Parish has said very kind things about what she's done for the parish. She's sitting it out. These are Republicans, and a lot of them are up for re-election next year.
But some heavy hitter Republicans like Boise Bollinger. Some are
probably
right
fewer than in the past. Fewer office holders than in the past, definitely.
All right. Well, thanks. We'll be talking a little bit more politics later on the show. I'm going to go over to Naomi right now, and this is your first time on Informed Sources, so the official welcome to you. And you and your colleague Richard Webster over at the Times-Picayune NOLA.com did really sort of heart-wrenching series about deaths that have happened at Orleans Parish Prison in the jail. And you interviewed the families of some of these people who died, and 7 of them you found since Katrina are not counted as jail deaths. Why don't you explain what you found out?
Right, yeah, they weren't counted, and in a lot of cases they weren't properly investigated either. A lot of these cases stemmed from inmates who got sick at the jail or injured at the jail, then went to the hospital, and while they were at the hospital in a state of dying, the sheriff's office had them released from custody. And the sheriff's office says it does have benefits, like the family can then have full visitation rights, and they don't have to staff the hospital anymore with guards. But on the other hand, in a lot of cases there were no autopsies of these inmates. In one case, a Vietnam War veteran was not, there were no charges in his death, even though there were witnesses and a confession saying that he had been kicked in the head and never woke up. So these are, lapses that if the investigations had any outside oversight, like in other cities, might not have happened, or if the sheriff's office had followed up and requested an autopsy for this man. But these 7 uncounted are sort of emblematic of a larger issue, that there is no independent oversight, and the sheriff's office is in charge of policing itself when it comes to deaths. And that's not the case in a lot of other cities.
And so, of course, that's an issue that is of concern regarding the consent decree and the monitors overlooking the jail. What are you finding out from the families? What do they find? I mean, obviously they've lost loved ones under circumstances that they want to know more about. I mean, what are they doing? What are they saying to you?
Well, first of all, it was hard for them to even find out in a lot of cases that their loved one had actually died. They had talked about, calling the jail and hearing an automated line telling them that their loved one had been released, and then later finding out through inmates, or eventually days later finding out from the sheriff's office that they had actually died. And then that was the beginning of a process of stonewalling and secrecy that caused a lot of them to want to file lawsuits. A lot of them did file lawsuits to get any information out of the sheriff's office about what happened, what led to those final moments.
And so what is then the sheriff's office saying when you guys made inquiries about this? What responses did you get?
Well, that was a tough one. They didn't respond to a lot of our inquiries. We asked for interviews with the sheriff. He declined. Eventually, we did get some statements. They said that they, try to prevent deaths and don't want any deaths to happen in their jail. They said that, we asked about why don't they bring in NOPD. They have trained homicide investigators who have much more experience looking at deaths than the jail detectives do. And just the appearance of not having a conflict of interest in looking at who was maybe at fault, maybe staff misconduct or neglect could have contributed to some of these even natural cause deaths. But anyways, they said that they weren't open to having NOPD come in because they are, trained law enforcement officers in the sheriff's office. They test well on their scores. He said that, they're fully trained and certified, so they don't need outside enforcement.
So I know, I've seen like the handbook for even like federal prisons with white-collar criminals, and like one of the early chapters talks about suicide. I mean, suicide's obviously a deal. Do you have any indication of what percentage or is suicide a factor in some of these? Or?
Oh yeah, I think we had about 8 suicides out of the 44 since Katrina, and a lot of them were people who had said they were suicidal when they were either booked in or later on to staff. There were even there was one natural causes that an expert testified in federal court maybe should have been counted as suicide because he repeatedly told the staff that he wanted to die and refused food and water for weeks, and eventually he ended up dying. Well, basically because he starved to death.
This is a situation, as I noted, that certainly is part of the consent decree, and the monitor is reviewing this also, and I'm sure that you guys are going to be keeping up on it as well.
We are. We have a continuing investigation into all these deaths and specific cases that people can find on.
Okay, we'll continue to look for that. Thanks, Naomi.
Thank you.
And speaking of the criminal justice system, we now have a permanent police chief as opposed to interim.
Yeah, when Chief Surpass resigned a couple of months ago, Mayor Andrews says that he's going to name a permanent police chief. There'd be a national search, and then he would do a permanent police chief. If he did a national search, it was on fast forward because, and he said the other day, he says, well, we did a national search, and Chief Harrison's the best person. The fact is, I don't think anybody ever really expected it to be a real national search, not when the mayor is already into his second term. I mean, if you do that at all, you do that at the beginning of your first term where you really have a chance to develop something. But historically, very few police chiefs have become part of a national search. I'm not even necessarily sure it's a good idea, but and in modern times, in the times that most of people are alive today, there's been 2. When Dutch Morial became mayor, he appointed a guy, this was in '79, James Parsons, who was a police chief in Birmingham. He had 110 applicants, and he appointed Parsons, and Parsons had great credentials. But had a very difficult time with the police strike, and then there was a police shooting in Algiers, and then there was retaliation, became known as the Algiers 7, and so that was a very bitter time. And then, of course, one of the more successful stories, probably the most successful, was Dutch Moriel's son, Mark Moriel, who appointed Richard Pennington, who was the #2 guy with the Washington Police Department, and who was very, very popular, and who was certainly linked with a reduction in crime during his period of time, so much that he ended his time in New Orleans actually running for mayor and finishing in a runoff to Ray Nagin, okay? And so Pennington was the rare example of someone from out who got the job, who lasted into his second term, and who was successful. In a sense, Chief Surpass, he was in Nashville at the time, but he was from New Orleans, and he'd spent a lot of his time with the New Orleans Police Department. So I guess you can call him a national search.
There was a national search. A lot of people thought it was for show, and that
but he was sort of the obvious local guy. But there's so many factions within the police department, and so when you bring in somebody new, you're talking about an overhaul, and that's something that's time consuming. So you really need, especially with a consent decree going on with so many criminal issues, you really don't want to start at zero. And of course there's all sort of morale problems with bringing in somebody new and political jockeying. And so I think what the mayor did was the thing that makes sense. As far as we know, Michael Harrison has a good reputation. He's been a district commander. He's dealt in special units and with narcotics, and so he certainly knows the turf out there.
Well, congratulations to him on getting the permanent appointment, and best of luck to him too, because it's no easy job before. And Stephanie, over to congressional races now. You were up there in the Shreveport area. That's where the debate was held, so you sort of nosed around what's going on with that congressional race.
There isn't one right in Shreveport. That's John Fleming, but nearby, surrounding, there's the 5th District, which is based in Monroe and comes down through Alexandria. So it was fun kind of driving through and trying to see all the signs. So you had a lot of them. And then, of course, the 6th District, which is Baton Rouge and surrounding areas. Those are very hotly contested. They're both really big fields, which make them really unpredictable. I think they're both Republican districts, but there's probably a Democrat in each case who will get into the runoff. The Monroe Mayor, Jamie Mayo, in the 5th District, Edmund Edwards, of course, who's out there having the time of his life, kind of on a farewell tour
in the 6th
District, which leaves one spot for a Republican. So, and whoever wins that spot is the overwhelming favorite in both of these districts.
Whose signs did you see the most of, let's say in the 5th, for starters?
In the 5th, I didn't get through a lot of it, but I saw, here and there. I didn't see enough of the district to get a real sense. But I'm going up next week, actually, for a debate. And the interesting thing there is Vance McAllister, the very endangered incumbent, the guy who just won last year and then was caught kissing an aide on camera.
The kissing congressman.
And then supposedly wasn't going to run again. Republicans called on him to resign, including Bobby Jindal and the chair of the state Republican Party, who I saw this week, who didn't seem terribly pleased that he seems to be the front runner. But the issue is there are just a bunch of other Republicans, and some of them are running good campaigns and have support. But how it's going to break out is the issue.
Yeah, and I've spoken with the Republican leadership, and I asked them straight up if they would back Vance McAllister in a runoff, and they told me it would be a tough decision.
Yeah.
And I actually couched my question with, what if Jamie Mayo is the other candidate in the runoff, a Democrat? There's some bad blood there between McAllister and the Republican leadership. There have been suggestions that there might be an all GOP runoff in the 5th District. I find that hard to believe. Mary Landrieu went out and endorsed Jamie Mayo this week. They are running a slate card, my sources tell me.
And she's really trying to get her vote out.
Right, Landrieu up top, Mayo right underneath, and right down the local ballot. So there's going to be a big turnout effort in the 5th.
You know what's different about those mostly rural congressional districts is that the population is dispersed over such a wide area that they're big, and so it's not like what we're used to here, where our two congressional districts are in a pretty tight area because of such a population concentration. And so in those areas, there's more turf that you're campaigning over, more sheriffs you have to deal with, more parish presidents and more consequences, more medium markets.
Rapides and Ouachita are the two voter-rich areas in the 5th.
Yeah.
So the 6th District.
6th District, it's fascinating. Again, there's Edwin Edwards on the Democratic side. There are probably 4 Republicans who have significant chances. One of them is really running away with the kind of money contest. His name is Garrett Graves, who's never run for office before, but he's a former aide to Governor Jindal on the coast. People here probably know about him because he's the one who got into the big fight with John Barry over the coastal lawsuit. But he's raised over $1 million, which is kind of extraordinary. There are several other candidates who've raised. Yeah.
And one candidate did drop out, right? And she threw
Cassie
her.
Felder, two have dropped out.
Yeah.
Supporting.
Two candidates have dropped out.
Right, and I think they're both supporting Dan Claytor, who is interesting. He's a sitting state senator. He's probably a little more moderate than some of them. He's running kind of a low-key race, yet he already represents a district that is kind of known for making stars. It's the district that Bill Cassidy represented before he went to Congress. Jay Darden, the lieutenant governor, represented. It's kind of a moderate, businessy district. But his campaign maybe seems a little less aggressive than some of the others. So we don't know how it's going to play out.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Back over to Naomi right now. No, there's something new over at the police department, actually through the police monitor's office, and it's mediating now to bring citizens together with a police officer when a citizen files a complaint, the minor complaints. Tell us how that's going to work.
Right, so it's not going to be major complaints like a use of force or adherence to law if an officer did something illegal. These are for complaints of an officer was rude to me or, he took too long to respond to my house. It's basically neglect of duty, unprofessionalism, and discourtesy. So all those types of complaints now are going to be eligible for this new program. It's completely voluntary. Both sides do have to agree to it. And basically, they're going to go to a place of the complainant's choosing. Each side is allowed to bring a moral support companion, and they just talk it out. And at a condition is that the complaint is then dropped completely. But the two parties have the option of coming to a resolution of their choice. It could be anything as simple as an apology or just the discussion itself, or it can be as creative as, the officer coming with the citizen to their church or, to see them in a place where they're respected and that sort of thing.
Who conducts the mediation, the actual meeting, sitting there with the two parties?
So the Independent Police Monitor has trained, I believe, 20 mediators, and they've gone through about 40 hours of training. They're former attorneys or current attorneys. A lot of them are educators or social workers with those types of backgrounds.
The part about it took the officer too long to respond to my complaint, that's not always the officer's fault, is it?
Right, and that's actually the basis for a lot of these neglect of duty complaints, I'm told by officials, stem from, or just even the unprofessionalism or the discourtesy ones, they stem from a sort of basic misunderstanding or a lack of understanding of what police officers are faced with in the field or what their jobs entail.
Have any meetings been held yet?
One was held last week, and I was told by both sides, they're completely confidential as part of the process, but I was told by the officer's attorney and the Independent Police Monitor's office that both sides were very happy with it. So.
Okay, thanks a lot, Naomi. We'll see how that moves along. Also, that was funded by a grant, so they're going to need to bring more money in to continue this, right?
Right, they're asking the City Council for about $120,000 for next year to fund the mediators. And
okay, thanks a lot. Okay, more politics, always more politics. And next year, yet another big race, the governor's race. Jeremy, what are we looking at for that?
Well, the latest news in the governor's race is an announcement by Public Service Commissioner Scott Angel that he will indeed be running in that race. It's interesting because Scott Angel is one of the kind of Cajun superstar politicians from Southwest Louisiana. It's the first time we've seen any kind of organized effort building up for governor since Kathleen Blanco, before her, Edwin Edwards. Angel has an immediate impact on this race. If he can galvanize the sheriffs and the parish presidents from the Texas border up till Baton Rouge, he will have a good share going into the primary. He has an oil and gas background. He was Natural Resources Secretary for Governor Jindal. He could use those contacts to move into North Louisiana, where we have yet to see a candidate emerge. However, those connections to Governor Bobby Jindal could prove dangerous. I think out of all the officials that are on the ballot this year and next, he has some of the closest ties to Jindal. He was his legislative liaison. He was his Natural Resources Secretary. Jindal appointed him as the interim lieutenant governor, LSU Board of Supervisors, a Water Commission, so on and so forth.
So other announced candidates are?
David Vitter, U.S. Senator, Lieutenant Governor Jay Darden, State Representative John Bell Edwards, the lone Democrat right now. He's the House Democratic Caucus Chairman. John Kennedy, State Treasurer, is seriously looking at this race. We'll have to wait and see if he's going to get in or not. And the other big question mark remains Mitch Landrieu. The mayor has been included in polls. He looks like he could make it into a runoff if you believe those polls. But he's staying quiet right now. And every time someone asks me about it, I say you got to think about political quality of life, because I think it does exist for politicians. You know, the city council members he campaigned for, most of them didn't get elected, so he's working with a council he didn't want. The infrastructure has problems. Crime is a challenge. The budget is right. The budget and finances are sideways. Yeah. So you got to wonder if he's not looking up I-10 at the mansion and wondering if life is better there.
And so, what does the Senate race do to both Vitter and even Landrieu?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I guess to start with Mitch Landrieu, you know, if his sister loses, I think that would bode well for him. If she wins, you got to wonder if voters are going to want to put two Landrieux in two top positions, although they have done in the past when he was lieutenant governor, right?
And then quickly to Vitter, because we're running
and then, of course, Vitter, I think is probably the most influential individual when it comes to Bill Cassidy's campaign. He's cleared the field for him. He's given his staff over to help manage the campaign. So I think a victory for Cassidy would also be a victory for Vitter.
All right, Jeremy, thanks a lot. Thank you all for being here this evening, and thank you for oh no, you know what? I'm tossing it to the end. I'm forgetting about looking ahead.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know, uncue the music, and you're looking ahead
of all the elections, probably the most exciting and most interesting local election is going to be the DA's race on the North Shore. This is a 22nd Judicial District. This is for Walter Reed's seat. 4 people running. He's held the seat for a long time, and it includes St. Tammany and Washington Parish. But that's going to be a really interesting election.
Jeremy.
Last week was the deadline to register new voters for the November election. Right now, the Secretary of State is verifying those voters. On Monday, we will learn exactly who got who registered, if Democrats got more. You know, sources are telling me that Democrats really targeted black women. If so, that could bode well for Mary Landrieu.
All righty. Naomi.
Yesterday, the Mother's Day shooters and some of their alleged gang members were all charged in 4 new shootings, and that trial's coming up November 10th.
All right. Stephanie?
And Mary Landrieu up against the wall is bringing in the big guns. A president, not Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, who actually won Louisiana. He's coming for a rally with her on Monday to kick off the early voting period, which starts Tuesday.
Thank you. And again, thank you guys for being here. And again, thank you all for joining us. And we do want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.